What if some of the most fascinating ancient places on Earth were never truly lost, only forgotten? Across deserts, mountains, river valleys, and remote wildernesses, archaeologists continue uncovering places that seem almost impossible. An underground temple hidden beneath the soil of Turkey, a mysterious hill in Rome built from millions of ancient artifacts, strange stone circles standing alone in the Armenian highlands, ancient settlements buried beneath peat bogs, and entire ceremonial complexes hidden beneath ordinary fields for thousands of years. Real discoveries. And each one offers a glimpse into worlds that vanished long before recorded history. Tonight, we'll travel from the Arctic coastline to the heart of the Amazon, exploring ancient sites that continue to challenge what we think we know about the past. But before we begin, take a moment to subscribe. Someone says everyone who subscribes before the journey begins receives 7 years of good luck. Whether that's true or not, there's only one way to find out. Now, get comfortable. The vanished builders of America's oldest stone tower. On a grassy hill overlooking the harbour of Newport, Rhode Island, stands a stone structure that has puzzled historians, archaeologists and explorers for generations. It is not especially large. It contains no hidden treasure. And yet few buildings in North America have inspired so many theories. Some believe it was built by early colonists. Others once claimed it was constructed by Vikings centuries before Columbus. A few even suggested connections to mysterious lost civilizations. The truth remains far less dramatic than some legends suggest. But the mystery of the tower itself continues to capture imaginations. Who built it? Why was it constructed? And how did a strange circular stone tower become one of America's most debated historical landmarks? This remarkable structure is known as the Newport Tower, and its story reveals how easily history can become entangled with mystery. The tower stands within what is now Truro Park, overlooking the waters of Narragansett Bay. At first glance, it appears unusual compared to many colonial structures. 8 sturdy stone arches support a circular upper level. Small windows punctuate the thick walls, and the entire building possesses a design unlike most surviving architecture from early America. For centuries, visitors have wondered whether it truly belongs to the colonial period at all. The mystery began because of its appearance. Unlike traditional wooden houses common in early New England, the tower resembles certain stone structures found in Europe. This led some researchers and amateur historians to speculate that it might be much older than official records suggested. One of the most famous theories connected the structure to Viking explorers. According to this idea, Norse sailors may have reached New England centuries before Christopher Columbus and constructed the tower as an observation point or religious building. The theory gained popularity because Viking settlements are known to have existed in parts of North America. Yet evidence supporting a Viking origin for the Newport Tower has remained elusive. Most archaeological research points toward a different explanation. Historical records suggest that the structure was likely built during the 17th century by Benedict Arnold, an early colonial governor of Rhode Island. Not the later Revolutionary War figure of the same name, but an earlier namesake who owned land in Newport. Documents describe a stone windmill standing on the property. Many historians believe the tower is simply the surviving remains of that windmill, yet even this explanation leaves room for debate. One reason the mystery endured is that the tower does not perfectly resemble every windmill built during the colonial era. Its unusual design encouraged speculation. Each generation offered new interpretations, and the structure gradually became one of America's most famous historical puzzles. Archaeologists have spent decades studying the site. Excavations around the tower uncovered artifacts dating primarily to the colonial period. Researchers examined the construction techniques, materials, and architectural details. Most findings support a 17th century origin. Yet public fascination with alternative theories has never completely disappeared. Part of the appeal lies in the location itself. Newport was one of colonial America's most important ports. Ships arrived from Europe, the Caribbean, and distant parts of the Atlantic world. Merchants, sailors, and travellers passed through the town. Stories spread easily in such places. Legends often grew alongside historical facts. The tower became a perfect subject for speculation. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Newport Tower is how it reflects humanity's desire to uncover hidden histories. People are naturally drawn to mysteries. When a structure appears unusual, questions follow. Could it be older than we think? Could forgotten explorers have reached these shores? Could entire chapters of history still be missing? The tower became a symbol of those possibilities. Even if the most extraordinary theories remain unlikely, the curiosity they inspire reveals something important about our relationship with the past. The surrounding landscape has changed dramatically since the tower was built. Colonial settlements grew into bustling towns, harbours expanded, roads replaced, old paths, yet the stone structure remained, watching over the harbour as generations came and went. Its arches survived storms, wars, and centuries of change. Today, the Newport Tower remains one of Rhode Island's most recognisable landmarks. Not because of treasure, not because of conquest, but because it continues to inspire questions that history has never completely silenced. Overlooking the waters of New England stands a mysterious stone tower, a structure linked to explorers, colonists, and centuries of speculation. A monument whose builders sparked one of America's oldest historical debates, and one of the most intriguing mysteries on the Atlantic coast, the forgotten survivors of Fort Caroline. Long before the English established Jamestown and decades before the Pilgrims arrived in New England, another European settlement stood along the Atlantic coast of North America. It was called Fort Caroline. Today, few people remember its name. Yet for a brief period during the 16th century, it stood at the centre of one of the most dramatic struggles in early American history. The story involves explorers, rival empires, religious conflict, and a settlement that nearly vanished from the historical record. But perhaps the greatest mystery is not how Fort Caroline was founded. It is what happened to the people who survived its destruction. The settlement was established by French colonists in 1564 near what is now Jacksonville, Florida. Unlike many later colonies, Fort Caroline was not simply a trading post or military outpost. It was intended to become a permanent home for French settlers in the New World. Many of the colonists were Huguenots, French Protestants seeking opportunities far from the religious tensions that divided Europe. The location seemed promising. A river provided access to the interior. The surrounding landscape offered food and resources. Local indigenous communities already knew the region well and became important allies during the colony's early years. At first, the settlement appeared to have a future. But life at Fort Caroline quickly proved difficult. Supplies were limited. Leadership disputes emerged. Some colonists became frustrated with the harsh conditions. Others explored the surrounding region in search of opportunities and resources. The colony survived, but only barely. At the same time, events far beyond Florida were beginning to shape its fate. Spain viewed the French presence as a threat. For decades, Spanish ships had travelled the waters surrounding Florida. The arrival of a rival European power raised concerns in Madrid and among Spanish officials in the Americas. The result was a confrontation that would change the future of the colony forever. In 1565, Spain established its own settlement farther south at St. Augustine. Today, it is recognised as the oldest continuously inhabited European established city in what would become the United States. The founding of St. Augustine immediately increased tensions between the two colonies. Neither side intended to leave. Neither side trusted the other, and both understood that control of the region was at stake. What followed was one of the most dramatic episodes in early North American history. French forces attempted to challenge the Spanish position, but severe weather disrupted their plans. A powerful storm scattered ships and created chaos along the coastline. The timing could not have been worse. While the French struggled with the aftermath of the storm, Spanish forces moved quickly. Led by Pedro Menendez de Avila, they marched north toward Fort Caroline. The attack came suddenly. The settlement's defences were weak. Many of its soldiers were absent. Within a short period, Spanish forces captured the fort and brought the French colony to an end. For generations, this event became the central chapter in the story of Fort Caroline, but it also created a question that historians continue to explore today. What happened to the survivors? Not everyone died during the attack. Some colonists escaped before Spanish troops arrived. Others may have fled into the surrounding wilderness. A few likely found refuge among indigenous communities that had interacted with the French for months or even years. Tracking their fate has proven remarkably difficult. Unlike major battles that leave behind detailed records, the collapse of Fort Caroline scattered people in multiple directions. Some eventually reached Europe, others disappeared from the historical record entirely. Their stories became fragmented. A name appears in one document, a brief account surfaces in another, then the trail goes cold. Archaeologists studying Fort Caroline face a similar challenge. The exact location of the original settlement remains debated. Changes in the landscape, shifting river channels, and centuries of development have complicated efforts to identify every detail of the colony. Artifacts have been discovered throughout the region, offering clues about daily life at the settlement. Yet many questions remain unanswered. How large was the colony at its peak? What did its buildings look like? And where did some of its survivors ultimately go? Part of what makes Fort Caroline so fascinating is that it represents a different version of North American history. Had the colony survived, the future of the region might have looked very different. French influence could have expanded across parts of the southeastern coast. Alliances with indigenous groups might have developed in unexpected ways. Instead, history took another path. The colony vanished. Its fort disappeared. And for centuries its story was overshadowed by later settlements. Yet Fort Caroline was never completely forgotten. Historical records preserved fragments of its existence. Archaeologists continued searching for evidence. Researchers examined maps, letters, and accounts written by the people who witnessed its rise and fall. Slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge. Not a complete picture, but enough to understand why the site remains important. Today, visitors to the Fort Caroline National Memorial encounter a peaceful landscape overlooking the St. Johns River. It is difficult to imagine the uncertainty that once defined this place. The sound of water remains, the forests remain, but the settlement itself is gone. Only traces survive, and perhaps that is what makes the story so compelling. Fort Caroline existed for only a short time, yet it became part of a much larger struggle involving religion, empire, and survival in an unfamiliar world. The fort disappeared, its people scattered, its future was cut short. Yet centuries later, historians are still following the clues left behind by those who survived. A forgotten colony, a vanished settlement, and one of the most intriguing lost chapters in the early history of North America, the lost inhabitants of Roanoke's neighbour colony. Off the coast of North Carolina, beyond the marshes, forests, and shifting sands of the Outer Banks, lies one of the most famous mysteries in American history. For more than 4 centuries, people have searched for the fate of the lost colony of Roanoke. Entire books have been written about the disappearance. Expeditions have searched for clues. Historians continue debating what became of the settlers who vanished without a trace. Yet one of the most important clues was discovered almost immediately. A single word: Croatoan. When English Governor John White returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, he expected to find the colony waiting for him. Instead, the settlement stood empty. Homes had been abandoned, the settlers were gone, and carved into a wooden post was the word Croatoan. The discovery transformed a struggling colony into one of history's greatest mysteries. But to understand the clue, it helps to understand the people behind the name. The Croatoans were an indigenous community living on an island south of Roanoke, now known as Hatteras Island. Long before English ships appeared on the horizon, they had built lives along the coast, navigating the waterways and surviving in an environment that often challenged newcomers. Unlike some neighbouring groups whose relationships with English settlers became strained, the Croatoans generally maintained friendlier connections with the colony. Trade took place, information was shared, and the settlers depended heavily on local knowledge to survive. That relationship may have become crucial as conditions at Roanoke worsened. The colony itself had been founded in 1587 as England's attempt to establish a permanent settlement in North America. Families crossed the Atlantic hoping to build new lives in an unfamiliar land. At first, the future seemed promising, but problems quickly emerged. Food supplies became unreliable. The settlers struggled to adapt to local conditions. Tensions with some neighbouring communities created additional challenges. Survival was never guaranteed. When John White returned to England for supplies, he expected to come back quickly. Instead, war between England and Spain delayed his return for nearly 3 years. By the time he finally reached Roanoke again, the colony had disappeared. Strangely, there were no signs of a violent attack. Buildings had been dismantled rather than destroyed. Valuable materials appeared to have been removed. The settlement looked as though the colonists had left deliberately. Then came the famous clue: Croatoan. White immediately recognised its significance. Before leaving, he and the colonists had agreed that if they relocated, they would leave behind a message indicating where they had gone. The word suggested a destination, not a warning, not a farewell, a destination. Unfortunately, bad weather prevented White from travelling to Croatoan Island to investigate further. Reluctantly, he returned to England, and the opportunity was lost. For centuries, historians have wondered whether the answer to the mystery was sitting in plain sight all along. Did the settlers simply move to Croatoan? The theory remains one of the most widely accepted explanations. The island offered several advantages. The Croatoans were allies, resources were available, local knowledge could help newcomers survive in a difficult environment. Rather than disappearing, the settlers may have joined an existing community. Over time, they could have blended into local society, creating a story that left few traces in English records. Archaeology has provided some intriguing clues. Excavations on Hatteras Island have uncovered European artefacts dating to the period after Roanoke's disappearance. Researchers have found tools, ceramics, and other objects suggesting continued contact between indigenous communities and Europeans. The discoveries do not prove exactly what happened, but they suggest the possibility that some settlers survived far longer than previously believed. Other theories continue to exist. Some propose that the colonists moved inland. Others suggest disease, conflict, or environmental hardships gradually reduced their numbers. Each explanation answers certain questions while leaving others unresolved. That uncertainty is part of what keeps the mystery alive. Yet the story of Croatoan is about more than a missing colony. It is also about the people who may have helped those colonists survive, the indigenous communities who understood the landscape, the waterways, the seasons, and the challenges of life along the Atlantic coast. Without their knowledge, the first English settlers would have faced even greater difficulties. Today the winds still move across the beaches and forests of North Carolina's Outer Banks. The islands remain much as they were centuries ago, shaped by storms, tides, and shifting sands. Somewhere within that landscape lies the answer to a mystery that has endured for more than 400 years. A vanished colony, a neighbouring community, and a single word carved into wood that continues to fascinate historians to this day: Croatoan. Perhaps not the end of the story, but the most important clue ever left behind. The missing witnesses of Jamestown's starving time. Along the banks of Virginia's James River stands the site of one of the most important settlements in American history. Today, Jamestown is remembered as the first permanent English colony in North America. Schoolbooks often describe it as the beginning of a new chapter in history, a place where colonists endured hardship, established a foothold in the New World, and helped shape the future of a nation. Yet hidden beneath that familiar story lies a far darker chapter, one so desperate that many of those who witnessed it never lived to tell the tale. Historians know this period as the Starving Time, and it remains one of the most haunting survival stories in early American history. The crisis unfolded during the winter of 1609 and 1610. Jamestown had existed for only a few years, and life in the colony was already difficult. Food supplies were limited, disease was common, and relations with surrounding indigenous communities had become increasingly strained. At the same time, vital shipments from England failed to arrive when they were needed most. The settlement found itself trapped. Inside the fort were hundreds of colonists struggling to survive. Beyond the walls lay an unfamiliar wilderness and growing tensions with the Powhatan Confederacy. As winter approached, conditions rapidly deteriorated. The people of Jamestown had expected challenges. They had not expected catastrophe. Food shortages became severe, livestock disappeared, stored supplies dwindled. Colonists searched desperately for anything that could sustain them through the winter months. Written accounts describe settlers consuming animals that normally would never have been considered food. Rats, snakes, dogs, and horses all became sources of survival. Yet even those measures were not enough. As the weeks passed, hunger became relentless, people weakened, disease spread, the population began to collapse. What makes the Starving Time particularly chilling is how quickly the settlement unravelled. Only months earlier, Jamestown had been viewed as a promising colonial venture. By the spring of 1610, it was fighting for existence. Historical records suggest that hundreds of settlers died during the crisis, leaving only a small fraction of the original population alive. Many of those who witnessed these events left behind no records at all. Their names disappeared from history. Their experiences vanished with them. This is one reason the starving time remains so difficult to fully understand. We know the broad outlines of what happened, but countless personal stories were lost forever. For centuries, some of the most disturbing accounts from Jamestown were treated with skepticism. Reports described colonists driven to unimaginable extremes by hunger. Historians debated whether these stories had been exaggerated or distorted over time. Then archaeology provided new evidence. Excavations at historic Jamestown uncovered human remains dating to the starving time period. Among the discoveries were the partial remains of a young English girl, later nicknamed Jane by researchers. Careful analysis revealed marks on the bones that strongly suggested desperate attempts to remove flesh after death. The findings provided physical evidence supporting long-standing accounts of survival cannibalism during the crisis. The discovery shocked many people, not because the stories were entirely unknown, but because archaeology had finally confirmed that at least some of them were true. The evidence offered a glimpse into conditions so severe that normal social boundaries collapsed under the pressure of survival. Yet the starving time was not caused by a single event. A combination of factors contributed to the disaster. Drought reduced agricultural production, leadership problems weakened the colony, supply ships were delayed, conflict disrupted trade networks that settlers had previously depended upon. Together, these challenges created a crisis from which many colonists could not recover. What makes the story especially tragic is that Jamestown ultimately survived. New supplies eventually arrived, additional settlers followed, the colony recovered and continued growing, but the people who endured the worst months of the starving time rarely benefited from that recovery. Most never lived to see it. Their voices disappeared from the historical record. Their experiences survive only through scattered accounts, archaeological discoveries, and the traces they left behind. Today, visitors walking through historic Jamestown encounter a peaceful landscape overlooking the river. Archaeologists continue uncovering artifacts that reveal new details about daily life in the colony. Each discovery helps historians better understand the challenges faced by the settlement's earliest inhabitants. Yet some questions remain unanswered. How many stories were lost with those who perished? What experiences were never recorded? And how many witnesses to one of America's greatest colonial disasters vanished without leaving a trace behind? Beneath the soil of Jamestown lies the evidence of a struggle for survival unlike any other in early American history. A settlement pushed to its limits. A winter that changed everything, and the forgotten witnesses of the starving time, whose stories still echo through the archaeological remains left behind centuries later. The vanished residents of Ferryland Colony. On a rugged stretch of Newfoundland's coastline, where cold Atlantic waves crash against rocky shores and thick fog often rolls in from the sea, lies one of the oldest colonial settlements in North America. Today, the small town of Ferryland appears peaceful, but beneath its soil are the remains of a community that played an important role in the early history of the New World, a settlement that flourished for a time, then gradually faded from prominence, leaving behind countless questions about the people who once called it home. This remarkable place was known as the Colony of Avalon, and its vanished residents remain among the forgotten pioneers of early colonial history. The story began in 1621 when Sir George Calvert, later known as Lord Baltimore, established a permanent English settlement at Ferryland on Newfoundland's Avalon Peninsula. His goal was ambitious. He hoped to create a thriving colony that could support fishing, trade and settlement in the North Atlantic. Unlike many short-lived colonial ventures of the period, Ferryland showed real promise. The harbour provided shelter for ships. The surrounding waters were rich with fish. Trade connections linked the settlement to Europe and other parts of North America. Before long, homes, workshops, warehouses and defensive structures appeared along the shoreline. Life in Ferryland was not easy. The climate was harsh. Winter storms battered the coast. Supplies could take months to arrive. The people who settled there faced challenges that few Europeans had experienced before. Yet despite these hardships, the colony survived. In fact, it became one of the most successful early English settlements in the region. By the middle of the 17th century, Ferryland had grown into an important centre of fishing, trade and administration. What makes Ferryland particularly fascinating is how much of daily life remained hidden for centuries. Unlike famous colonial settlements such as Jamestown or Plymouth, Ferryland gradually slipped from public memory. Its buildings disappeared, its streets vanished beneath layers of soil, and many of the people who lived there were forgotten by history. For generations, only scattered records hinted at what once existed along this coastline. The mystery began to unfold again in the late 20th century. Archaeologists started excavating the site, hoping to learn more about the colony and the people who built it. What they discovered exceeded expectations. Stone foundations emerged from the ground. Sections of old streets appeared. Workshops, wells, defensive walls, and household objects revealed themselves after centuries of burial. Each discovery offered a glimpse into a world that had almost been lost. Archaeologists uncovered enormous numbers of artifacts connected to daily life in the colony. Ceramics, tools, pipes, glassware, jewellery, and personal belongings helped reconstruct the lives of Ferryland's residents. Millions of artifacts have now been recovered from the site, making it one of the most important archaeological locations in North America. Yet the discoveries also raised new questions. Who were all these people? What were their daily lives like? How many stories disappeared when the settlement declined? Historical records preserve the names of governors, merchants, and important figures. But most residents left a little trace behind. Fishermen, craftsmen, servants, families, children. The ordinary people who formed the heart of the colony often remain invisible in written history. Archaeology has become one of the few ways to recover their stories. Some of the most intriguing discoveries suggest that Ferryland was more connected to the wider world than many people realise. Artifacts from Europe have been uncovered alongside evidence of trade and interaction with indigenous communities. Recent discoveries continue to reveal new details about these relationships and the complex world that existed along Newfoundland's coast. For a settlement so far from Europe, Ferryland was surprisingly international. Ships arrived from distant ports. Goods crossed the Atlantic. Ideas and cultures mixed in ways that are still being studied today. Yet despite its success, the colony's fortunes eventually changed. Political conflicts, economic shifts, warfare, and changing priorities affected the settlement over time. Other locations became more important. New opportunities emerged elsewhere. Gradually, Ferryland lost the prominence it once enjoyed. The people did not vanish overnight. There was no sudden disaster. Instead, the story unfolded slowly across generations. Families moved, communities changed, buildings fell into ruin, and eventually much of the original colony disappeared from view. That gradual disappearance is part of what makes Ferryland so fascinating. Unlike lost cities destroyed by catastrophe, this settlement faded quietly into history. Its residents simply became part of the passing centuries. Today, archaeologists continue uncovering new evidence at Ferryland. Every excavation reveals fresh details about the colony and the people who lived there. The site remains one of the best preserved early English colonial settlements in North America, offering an extraordinary window into a world that once seemed lost forever. Beneath the fields and shoreline of Newfoundland lie the traces of forgotten lives, a colony built on hope and determination, a community shaped by the Atlantic Ocean, and the vanished residents of Ferryland, whose stories are slowly returning to light through the work of archaeology. The underground temple no one expected to find. Deep in southeastern Turkey, beneath fields that appeared ordinary for thousands of years, archaeologists uncovered something few people ever expected to find. At first, it looked like another ancient settlement, a cluster of stone walls buried beneath layers of soil. Nothing unusual, nothing that seemed likely to change our understanding of the distant past. But as excavations continued, the site revealed something far more remarkable. Ancient homes, burials, thousands of carefully crafted beads, and a large stone structure that appeared to have served a special purpose for the people who lived there. Today, this extraordinary site is known as Bonkuklu Tala, and it may be one of the oldest settlements ever discovered. The story began in southeastern Turkey, near the upper reaches of the Tigris River. The region has long been known for its archaeological treasures. Some of the world's earliest farming communities once lived here. Ancient peoples built villages, developed new technologies, and slowly transformed human society. Yet few expected Bonkuklu Tala to become one of the region's most important discoveries. When archaeologists first began investigating the site, they quickly realized they were looking at something very old. extremely old. Evidence suggested that people were living here more than 12,000 years ago. That places the settlement near the very beginning of the Neolithic period, when humanity was starting to move away from a purely nomadic lifestyle. At the time, many communities still survived through hunting and gathering. Permanent settlements were rare. Large stone buildings were even rarer, yet Boncuklu Tala appeared to contain both. As excavations expanded, researchers uncovered the remains of an organised community. Stone houses stood side by side. Pathways connected different parts of the settlement. Generations of people had clearly lived here over long periods of time. This was not a temporary camp. It was a place people called home. One of the most fascinating discoveries was a large communal structure located near the centre of the settlement. Unlike the surrounding homes, this building appeared different in both size and design. Its stone construction suggested it served an important purpose. Researchers believe it may have functioned as a gathering place for the community. Others have suggested it could have been used for ceremonies or rituals. Because no written records exist from this period, nobody knows exactly how the building was used. That uncertainty has led some people to describe it as an underground temple. Whatever its purpose, it clearly held special significance for the people who built it. The discovery surprised archaeologists for an important reason. For many years, historians believed large communal structures appeared only after societies became more advanced and agriculture became widespread. Boncuklu Tala challenges that idea. The people living here may have been building shared ceremonial spaces thousands of years before the rise of the first cities. That possibility has attracted attention from researchers around the world. The settlement also revealed countless objects left behind by its ancient inhabitants. Stone tools were scattered throughout the site. Arrowheads and blades suggested hunting remained an important part of daily life. Decorative objects appeared in surprising numbers. Among the most common finds were beads, thousands of them. Some were carved from stone, others were made from shell and different natural materials. The sheer quantity of beads eventually inspired the modern name of the site. Boncuklu Tala literally means beaded field. These discoveries reveal something important about the people who lived here. They were not simply focused on survival. They created ornaments. They decorated themselves. They invested time and effort into craftsmanship. Even 12,000 years ago, people cared about identity, beauty, and personal expression. Excavations have also uncovered numerous burials beneath the settlement. Many ancient communities buried their dead close to where they lived. Boncuklu Tala appears to have followed a similar tradition. These burials provide valuable clues about the people who once called the settlement home, their health, their diet, their daily lives. Each discovery helps archaeologists build a clearer picture of a world that disappeared thousands of years ago, yet many mysteries remain. Why was the settlement built in this particular location? What role did the large communal building serve? Why did generations of people continue returning to the site? And what eventually caused the community to disappear? The answers have been lost to time. No written records survive. No stories were passed down. Only stone walls and buried artifacts remain. Perhaps that is what makes Boncuklu Tala so fascinating. It offers a glimpse into a chapter of human history that is almost unimaginably distant. A time before kingdoms, before empires, before writing, before most of the monuments we associate with ancient civilization even existed. Yet people were already gathering together, building communities, creating shared spaces, and shaping the foundations of the world that would eventually follow. Today, archaeologists continue uncovering new sections of the settlement. Each season brings fresh discoveries, new structures, new artifacts, and new clues about the lives of the people who lived here thousands of years ago. Hidden beneath the fields of southeastern Turkey lies one of humanity's oldest known communities, a place where ancient builders gathered, worked, and buried their dead long before recorded history began. A mysterious underground structure, a forgotten settlement, and a discovery that continues to reshape our understanding of the ancient world. The mysterious hill covered with thousands of artifacts. In the heart of Rome, not far from the banks of the Tiber River, stands a hill unlike any other in the ancient world. At first glance, it appears completely ordinary. Grass grows across its slopes, trees cover portions of its surface. People walk past it every day without realizing what lies beneath their feet. But this is not a natural hill. It was not formed by volcanic activity. It was not shaped by rivers or erosion. Instead, it was built by people, not intentionally as a monument, not as a fortress, and not as a temple. This remarkable place was created by millions of discarded objects left behind by the Roman Empire. Today, it is known as Monte Testaccio, and it may be one of the most unusual archaeological sites ever discovered. The story begins during the height of ancient Rome. At its peak, the city was home to more than 1 million people. Feeding such a population required an enormous supply network. Ships arrived constantly from across the Mediterranean. Grain came from North Africa. Wine arrived from distant provinces, and vast quantities of olive oil flowed into Rome from regions that are now part of Spain and North Africa. Much of that olive oil was transported in large clay containers known as amphorae. These vessels were strong enough to survive long journeys across the sea. Once they arrived in Rome, the oil was emptied into warehouses and storage facilities near the river. But then a problem emerged. What should be done with the empty containers? Unlike some pottery, these amphorae were difficult to reuse. The oil often soaked into the clay walls. Over time, the containers became dirty, brittle, and impractical to transport back to their places of origin. The Romans developed a surprisingly organised solution. Rather than scattering the broken containers throughout the city, workers carried them to a designated area near the river. There, the amphorae were deliberately smashed into pieces. The fragments were carefully stacked layer upon layer, year after year, decade after decade, century after century. Slowly, the pile grew larger. What began as a practical dumping ground eventually became an artificial hill. Today, Monte Testaccio rises more than 100 feet above the surrounding landscape. Archaeologists estimate that it contains the remains of over 50 million amphorae. The sheer scale of the site is difficult to imagine. Every fragment represents a shipment, every shipment represents trade, and every layer reflects another chapter in the daily life of ancient Rome. For centuries, people assumed the hill was little more than an ancient garbage dump. But modern archaeological research revealed something far more interesting. The pottery fragments preserved an extraordinary amount of information. Many amphorae carried painted markings and inscriptions. These recorded details such as where the oil originated, who transported it, and how much it weighed. In effect, the broken containers became a giant archive of the Roman economy. By studying the fragments, researchers gained insight into trade routes that stretched across the Mediterranean. They discovered how goods moved through the empire. They learned which regions supplied Rome with olive oil, and they uncovered evidence of one of the largest distribution systems in the ancient world. One of the most surprising discoveries is how carefully the hill was constructed. The Romans did not simply throw pottery into a random pile. Excavations revealed organised layers and terraces. Workers even sprinkled lime across the broken fragments to reduce unpleasant odours caused by leftover oil. The entire operation appears to have been managed with remarkable efficiency. This raises an interesting question. Why invest so much effort into disposing of broken pottery? The answer reveals something important about Rome itself. The city consumed resources on a scale few ancient societies could match. Monte Testaccio exists because the Roman Empire was importing enormous quantities of food and supplies every year. The hill serves as physical evidence of just how vast that system became. Over time, the hill took on new roles. During the Middle Ages, it became a gathering place for festivals and celebrations. Later, tunnels were dug into its slopes and used for storing wine. Its unusual structure helped keep temperatures cool during the hot Roman summers. Even centuries after the empire disappeared, the hill continued to serve the people living around it. Yet Monte Testaccio remains mysterious in its own way, not because nobody knows who built it. The builders are obvious. They were the countless workers, merchants, sailors and labourers who kept Rome supplied. The mystery lies in what the hill reveals about a world that no longer exists. Every pottery fragment represents a journey across the Mediterranean, a shipment unloaded at the docks, a meal prepared in a Roman household, a small moment in the life of a city that once ruled much of the known world. Today, visitors see only a grassy hill rising above the streets of Rome. Few realise they are standing beside one of the largest collections of ancient artefacts ever assembled in a single location. Hidden beneath the soil are millions of broken pieces of history, the remains of trade networks, industries and daily routines that helped sustain an empire for centuries. In the heart of Rome stands a hill built not by nature, but by human activity, a mountain of pottery, a monument to ancient commerce, and one of the most extraordinary archaeological landscapes ever created by accident, the ancient stone complex hidden in the Caucasus. High on a windswept plateau in southern Armenia stands one of the most mysterious ancient sites in the Caucasus. Scattered across the landscape are hundreds of massive standing stones. Some rise several feet above the ground, others lean slightly after thousands of years of exposure to wind, rain and snow. From a distance, the site almost looks like the ruins of a forgotten fortress. But as visitors walk among the stones, it quickly becomes clear that this place is something far more unusual. No one knows exactly why it was built. No one knows exactly who built it. And despite decades of research, archaeologists continue debating its true purpose. This remarkable site is known as Zorat's Kara, and it remains one of Armenia's greatest archaeological mysteries. Zorat's Kara lies near the town of Sisyan in Armenia's Sunik province. The site occupies a broad plateau overlooking river valleys and distant mountains. Today the surrounding landscape feels quiet and remote, but thousands of years ago this region stood at the crossroads of ancient cultures moving through the Caucasus. For generations, people passed through these highlands, leaving traces of their lives behind. Among those traces was a stone complex unlike anything else in the region. The monument consists of more than 200 large basalt stones arranged across the landscape. Some form a rough circular enclosure. Others stretch outward in long lines resembling pathways or avenues. Many of the stones weigh several tons. A number of them contain carefully drilled holes near their upper sections. These openings have become one of the site's most intriguing features. For centuries, local people wondered why they were there. Even today, no explanation has gained universal acceptance. The name Zorat's Kara is often translated as army stones or warrior stones. Local legends tell of ancient warriors turned to stone. According to some stories, powerful leaders were buried beneath the monument long ago. Whether those stories preserve distant memories of the site's origins remains unknown. Like many ancient monuments, Zorat's Kara exists somewhere between archaeology and folklore. The stones preserve evidence of the past. The legends preserve how people later tried to explain them. Because of its unusual appearance, Zorat's Kara is sometimes called the Armenian Stonehenge. The comparison is understandable. Both sites contain large standing stones arranged in deliberate patterns. Both have inspired theories about astronomy, and both continue to attract visitors searching for answers. Yet Zorat's Kara has its own unique story. It developed within a very different landscape and cultural tradition than the famous monument in England. One of the most popular theories suggests the site may have functioned as an ancient observatory. Researchers noticed that some of the holes carved into the stones appear to point towards specific areas of the sky. Supporters of this idea believe ancient observers may have tracked the movement of stars, the sun, or the moon from this location. If true, the site could have played an important role in helping people understand seasonal changes and celestial cycles. The theory gained widespread attention and helped make Zorat's Kara famous far beyond Armenia. However, not all archaeologists agree. Excavations at the site revealed evidence of ancient burials and stone tombs dating mainly to the Bronze Age and Iron Age. Some researchers argue that Zorat's Kara was primarily a burial complex rather than an observatory. Others believe it may have served multiple purposes over many centuries. A place of ceremony, a burial ground, perhaps even a gathering place for communities living in the surrounding highlands. The truth may be more complicated than any single theory suggests. One reason the mystery remains unsolved is the site's immense age. The stones have stood here for thousands of years. Over that time, cultures changed, languages disappeared, traditions evolved. Any stories explaining the monument's original purpose may have been lost long ago. Unlike later civilizations, the builders left behind no written records describing what they intended. Only the stones remain, silent witnesses to events that occurred long before recorded history. Archaeologists continue studying the arrangement of the monument, the central, circle, the long rows of stones, the isolated standing pillars scattered across the site. Each feature offers clues, yet each discovery seems to generate new questions as well. Why were certain stones drilled while others were left untouched? Why were the stones arranged in these particular patterns? And what significance did this place hold for the people who gathered here thousands of years ago? Part of what makes Zoratzkara so fascinating is its setting. The monument stands beneath vast open skies where stars remain clearly visible on cloudless nights. Far from large cities, the landscape feels much as it might have appeared thousands of years ago. Visitors often describe a sense of isolation standing among the stones, a feeling that they have stepped into a place connected to a much older world. Whether the site was built for astronomy, ceremony, burial, or something else entirely, it continues to inspire that sense of wonder. Today, Zoratzkara remains one of the most important prehistoric monuments in the Caucasus. Researchers continue searching for answers. New surveys reveal additional details about the stones and their arrangement. Yet the monument still guards many of its secrets. High in the Armenian highlands stands a circle of ancient stones, a place shaped by forgotten builders, a monument surrounded by legend, and one of the most intriguing archaeological mysteries in the ancient world, the stone structures hidden across the Amazon. For centuries, the Amazon rainforest was often described as an untouched wilderness, a vast green expanse stretching across South America, a place where nature dominated the landscape and human activity seemed almost invisible. But hidden beneath the forest canopy, buried under centuries of vegetation, archaeologists have uncovered evidence that tells a very different story. Across the western Amazon, enormous geometric structures appear in the earth. Perfect circles, massive squares, long straight lines connecting distant locations. Some are hundreds of feet across, others stretch across entire landscapes, and for decades, few people knew they existed. These remarkable earthworks are known as the Acre geoglyphs, and they are helping rewrite the history of the Amazon itself. The geoglyphs are located in the Brazilian state of Acre, near the border with Bolivia. Many remained hidden for centuries beneath dense rainforest. It was only during the 20th century, as portions of the forest were cleared, that unusual shapes began appearing from above. Pilots noticed strange geometric patterns carved into the landscape. Researchers soon realized they were not natural formations. Someone had built them, and whoever built them had done so on an enormous scale. As archaeologists expanded their investigations, they discovered that these were not isolated structures. Hundreds of geoglyphs were scattered across the region. Some formed circles, others formed rectangles and squares. Many were connected by ancient roads and pathways. Together they created a network that stretched across large portions of the western Amazon. The size of the structures is difficult to imagine. Many consist of deep ditches surrounded by raised earthen walls. Some are more than 1,000 feet across. Constructing even one would have required a large workforce and careful planning. Building hundreds of them would have demanded cooperation between entire communities. This immediately raised an important question. Who are the people capable of creating such monumental projects in the middle of the rainforest? For much of modern history, many researchers believe the Amazon could not support large, complex societies. The soil was thought to be too poor, the environment too challenging. According to that view, only small scattered communities could survive here. The Acre geoglyphs challenged those assumptions. Their existence suggested that large populations once lived in regions previously believed to have been sparsely inhabited. Dating evidence indicates that some of these structures were built long before European explorers arrived in South America. Generations of people modified the landscape, cleared portions of forest, and created monumental earthworks that remained hidden for centuries beneath later vegetation. Yet despite years of study, their purpose remains uncertain. Unlike ancient civilizations that left written records, the builders of the geoglyphs left no texts explaining what they created. As a result, archaeologists have developed several theories. Some believe the structures served ceremonial purposes, large gathering places where communities met for rituals, celebrations, or important social events. Others suggest they may have marked territorial boundaries or important locations within the landscape. It is also possible that different geoglyphs served different functions over time. One thing is clear: the geoglyphs were not ordinary villages. Excavations have revealed relatively few signs of permanent occupation inside many of the structures. Instead, they seem to have been places people visited for specific purposes, places that held special meaning for the communities that built them. The discovery of the geoglyphs also changed how researchers view the Amazon rainforest itself. Rather than existing completely separate from human influence, parts of the forest may have been carefully managed for thousands of years. Evidence suggests that ancient communities modified their environment while still maintaining large areas of forest. The Amazon was not simply a wilderness surrounding human settlements. In many places, it may have been a landscape shaped by people over countless generations. In recent years, new technologies have revealed even more surprises. Satellite imagery, aerial surveys, and LiDAR scanning continue, uncovering previously unknown sites hidden beneath vegetation. Researchers now suspect that many more earthworks remain undiscovered across the Amazon basin. The structures already known may represent only a fraction of what still lies concealed beneath the forest. That possibility is perhaps the most fascinating part of the story. For centuries, explorers entered the Amazon searching for lost cities and forgotten civilizations. Many of those stories became legends, yet the reality may be just as remarkable. Hidden beneath the trees are traces of ancient societies that transformed the landscape on a scale few people imagine possible. Not mythical kingdoms, not lost empires of gold, but real communities whose achievements remained hidden for generations. Today, the Acre geoglyphs remain among the most important archaeological discoveries in South America. Researchers continue mapping new sites and searching for answers. Each excavation reveals a little more about the people who once lived here, and each discovery challenges old assumptions about the history of the Amazon. Hidden beneath one of the world's largest rainforests lies a network of enormous geometric earthworks. Monuments built by forgotten communities, structures visible only from above, and one of the most extraordinary archaeological mysteries ever uncovered in the Amazon: the mysterious towers built by a lost culture. Along the dry desert coast of Peru, far from the towering peaks of the Andes, stands one of the most unusual ancient monuments ever discovered in South America. At first glance, the site appears surprisingly simple: a series of stone towers stretching across the top of a low ridge. No massive pyramids, no enormous temples, no giant statues carved into the landscape, just 13 stone towers standing silently beneath the desert sun. Yet for generations, archaeologists have been fascinated by these structures. Who built them? Why were they arranged in such a precise line? And how did an ancient society create one of the world's earliest known astronomical complexes? This remarkable place is known as Chanquillo, and it remains one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites in the ancient Americas. The site is located in Peru's Casma Valley, a region that has been home to human communities for thousands of years. Today the landscape appears dry and rugged. Rocky hills rise above broad desert plains. Rain is rare, vegetation is sparse. Yet long before the rise of the Inca Empire, people were building impressive monuments in this harsh environment. Among them was a culture that left behind one of Peru's greatest mysteries. Archaeologists believe Chanquillo was constructed more than 2,000 years ago. The people responsible remain largely unknown. Unlike later civilizations, they left no written records. No detailed histories survive. No ancient texts explain their beliefs or traditions. Most of what researchers know comes directly from the ruins themselves, and those ruins tell a fascinating story. The most famous feature of Chanquillo is its line of 13 stone towers. The towers stretch across a ridge from north to south. Some stand taller than others. Together they create one of the most striking sights in Peruvian archaeology. For many years, researchers debated their purpose. Some believed they served defensive functions. Others suggested ceremonial uses. The answer turned out to be even more remarkable. Careful studies revealed that the towers align with the movement of the sun throughout the year. Viewed from specific locations, the rising and setting sun appears to move along the line of towers as the seasons change. During different times of the year, the sun rises beside different towers. This allowed ancient observers to track the passage of time with remarkable accuracy. In effect, the towers functioned as a giant solar calendar. Long before mechanical clocks existed, long before modern observatories, people here were carefully watching the sky and recording the rhythms of the year. For ancient communities, such knowledge was incredibly important. Knowing when seasons changed could help determine when to plant crops, prepare for harvests, or organize religious ceremonies. The movement of the sun influenced daily life in countless ways. Chanquillo may have allowed its builders to predict those changes with impressive precision. The site contains more than just the towers. Nearby stands a large hilltop complex surrounded by defensive walls. From a distance it resembles a fortress. Massive stone structures occupy the summit. Entrances control access to the interior. For many years, archaeologists believed the complex was primarily military in nature, yet its exact purpose remains uncertain. Some researchers believe it served both ceremonial and defensive functions. Others suggest it may have been the centre of a larger political and religious landscape. Whatever its role, it clearly held great importance for the people who built it. The location itself was carefully chosen. From the surrounding hills, observers could see the towers stretching across the horizon. The desert sky offered clear views of the sun's annual journey. Every aspect of the landscape appears connected to observation and planning. Nothing about the arrangement seems accidental. One of the most fascinating aspects of Chankillo is its age. Many ancient cultures developed sophisticated astronomical knowledge, but Chankillo appears to be one of the earliest known examples of a solar observatory, built specifically to track the movement of the sun across the horizon. That achievement required careful observation over many years. The builders understood patterns that repeated across generations. They transformed that knowledge into stone, and they created a monument that still functions today. Yet despite these discoveries, many mysteries remain. Who exactly were the people who built Chankillo? What was the relationship between the towers and the fortified complex? How was the site used during ceremonies and gatherings? And what eventually happened to the culture responsible for its construction? The answers remain uncertain. The society that built Chankillo faded from history long before Europeans arrived in South America. Its name has been lost, its language disappeared. Only the monument survived. Like many ancient sites, Chankillo reminds us how much human knowledge can vanish over time. Entire cultures can disappear while their creations remain standing, waiting for future generations to rediscover them. Stone by stone, tower by tower, clue by clue. Today, Chankillo is recognized as one of Peru's most important archaeological treasures. Researchers continue studying the site and uncovering new details about its builders. Each discovery helps reveal a little more about a civilization that once watched the skies from this remote desert ridge. Hidden among the deserts of Peru stands a line of ancient towers, a monument built by a forgotten culture, a calendar written in stone, and one of the oldest astronomical complexes ever discovered in the ancient world. The ancient harbour, buried far from the sea. In the dry plains of western India lies one of the most remarkable cities of the ancient world. At first glance, the landscape seems an unlikely place to find evidence of maritime trade. There are no large ships, no busy ports, and no coastline visible from the site itself. Yet more than 4,000 years ago, this location may have served as one of the most important trading centres in an ancient civilization that stretched across much of South Asia. What makes the site so unusual is a single question. Why would an ancient harbour be found so far from the sea? Today, this remarkable place is known as Lothal, and its discoveries continue to reveal new details about one of history's earliest urban civilizations. Lothal is located in the modern Indian state of Gujarat. The site was once part of the vast Indus Valley civilization, sometimes called the Harappan civilization. At its peak, this civilization included hundreds of settlements spread across present-day India and Pakistan. Its people built carefully planned cities, developed sophisticated drainage systems, and established trade networks that connected distant regions. Lothal appears to have played an important role within that network. Archaeologists first began excavating the site during the 1950s. What they uncovered surprised researchers almost immediately. Beneath the soil lay the remains of a well-planned city. Streets followed organised layouts, buildings were constructed from baked bricks, drainage channels carried water away from residential areas. Like other major Harappan settlements, Lothal displayed an impressive level of urban planning, but one discovery attracted more attention than anything else. Near the edge of the ancient city stood a large rectangular basin built from brick. Unlike ordinary reservoirs, its design appeared unusual. Its size was substantial, its walls were carefully engineered, and its position suggested a possible connection to ancient waterways. Many archaeologists concluded that they had discovered an ancient dockyard. If correct, it would be one of the oldest known dock facilities ever found anywhere in the world. The idea captured attention across the archaeological community. Thousands of years before the rise of famous ports in the Mediterranean, merchants at Lothal may already have been managing maritime trade. Ships could have entered through channels connected to nearby rivers and tidal waters. Goods arriving from distant regions may have passed through this harbour before being distributed throughout the Indus civilization. The evidence for trade is extensive. Excavations uncovered beads, tools, ornaments, and other manufactured goods. Many were crafted with remarkable skill. Lothal became especially famous for its bead-making industry. Artisans worked with semi-precious stones, producing items that were traded across large distances. Some objects found at the site suggest connections with regions far beyond the Indus Valley itself. Trade routes may have linked Lothal to communities across the Arabian Sea and even Mesopotamia. For an ancient city, its reach was surprisingly extensive, yet the dockyard remains the site's greatest mystery. Not all researchers agree about its exact purpose. Some archaeologists support the traditional interpretation that it functioned as a harbour connected to ancient waterways. Others suggest it may have served as a reservoir or water management structure instead. Changes in the landscape over thousands of years make the question difficult to answer with certainty. Rivers have shifted, coastlines have changed, ancient channels disappeared long ago. The environment that existed when Lothal flourished was very different from what visitors see today. That is part of what makes the site so fascinating. Standing among the ruins, it can be difficult to imagine that boats may once have travelled through these waters. The sea now seems distant. The landscape appears quiet. Yet evidence suggests this may once have been a place filled with activity. Merchants arriving with goods, craftsmen producing valuable products, workers loading and unloading cargo, a thriving centre connected to a much larger world. Like many cities of the Indus Valley civilization, Lothal eventually declined. The reasons remain uncertain. Environmental changes may have played a role. Shifting rivers could have disrupted trade routes. Changing climate conditions may have affected agriculture and settlement patterns. Over time, the city was abandoned. Its buildings slowly collapsed. Wind and soil buried much of what remained. For thousands of years, the site disappeared from view. Only in the modern era did archaeologists begin uncovering its story once again. Today, Lothal stands as one of the most important archaeological sites in India. It offers a rare glimpse into a civilization that left behind no readable historical records. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, the writing system of the Indus Valley civilization remains undeciphered. As a result, the ruins must tell the story themselves. Every wall, every artifact, every street, and every mystery preserved beneath the soil. Far from the modern coastline lies the remains of an ancient city, a place where trade, craftsmanship, and innovation flourished more than 4,000 years ago. A harbour that may once have connected distant worlds, and one of the most intriguing archaeological mysteries in the history of ancient India, the strange stone labyrinth in the Arctic. Far in the north, where cold winds sweep across rocky islands and the waters of the White Sea stretch toward the Arctic, lies one of Europe's most unusual archaeological mysteries. Scattered across a remote island landscape are a series of strange stone patterns. From above, they resemble spirals, circular pathways winding inward toward a central point. At first glance, they almost look like giant puzzles carved into the ground. Yet nobody knows exactly why they were built. There are no written records, no surviving legends that fully explain them, only stones arranged in carefully planned patterns that have endured for centuries. These remarkable structures are known as the Bolshoi-Zayatsky labyrinths, and they remain among the most mysterious monuments in the Arctic world. The labyrinths are located on Bolshoi-Zayatsky Island, part of the Solovetsky archipelago in northern Russia. Today the islands feel isolated and windswept. The landscape is dominated by rocky shores, sparse vegetation, and the ever-present sea. For much of the year, conditions can be harsh. Yet people have been visiting these islands for thousands of years. Evidence of ancient activity appears throughout the region. Among the most intriguing discoveries are the stone labyrinths themselves. Researchers have identified more than a dozen labyrinths on the island. Most were constructed using small stones carefully arranged into winding circular designs. Some measure only a few yards across. Others are considerably larger. Despite differences in size, many share a similar layout. A narrow path twists back and forth before eventually reaching the centre. Anyone walking the route must follow the entire winding course. There are no shortcuts. The design appears deliberate. And that has led archaeologists to ask an obvious question: why were they built? For generations, scholars have debated the answer. One theory suggests the labyrinths may have held ceremonial or spiritual significance. Ancient communities often attach special meaning to circular symbols and ritual pathways. Walking through the winding routes may have formed part of ceremonies now lost to history. The journey itself may have been more important than the destination. Other researchers have proposed connections to beliefs about life, death, and the spiritual world. Yet proving such ideas is difficult. The builders left behind no written explanations. Another theory connects the labyrinths to fishing communities that once lived along the northern coast. For people surviving in such a challenging environment, the sea provided food, transportation, and opportunity. Some scholars believe the stone patterns may have been linked to rituals intended to ensure successful fishing expeditions. Others suggest they could have marked gathering places used by coastal communities during certain seasons. The truth remains uncertain. Each theory explains part of the puzzle, but none explains everything. One of the most fascinating aspects of the labyrinths is their location. Many stand surprisingly close to the shoreline. Visitors can often see the sea while standing among the stones. This relationship between the structures and the surrounding landscape may be important. The builders clearly selected these locations for a reason. Whether that reason was practical, spiritual, or symbolic remains one of the site's enduring mysteries. Archaeologists have also attempted to determine exactly when the labyrinths were constructed. That task has proven difficult. Stone structures rarely contain materials that can be easily dated. Most estimates suggest the labyrinths are several centuries old. Some researchers believe they may be considerably older. Without definitive evidence, their precise age remains a subject of debate. Like many ancient monuments, the labyrinths guard their secrets carefully. The remote location has helped preserve them. Unlike archaeological sites near large cities, the Bolshoi Zayatsky labyrinths escaped much of the development that transformed other historic landscapes. The islands remained isolated, the stone pathways survived, and the mystery endured. Visitors who walk among the labyrinths today often describe a strange atmosphere. The Arctic landscape feels timeless. The wind moves across the islands much as it did centuries ago. The sea continues to break against the rocky shoreline, and the stone circles remain exactly where their builders left them. There is something captivating about standing inside a monument whose purpose has been forgotten. A reminder that not every chapter of human history survives intact. Perhaps that is why the labyrinths continue to attract attention. Not because they are enormous, not because they contain treasure, but because they raise questions that remain unanswered. Who built them? What did they mean? And why did people invest so much effort creating intricate stone patterns on remote islands near the edge of the Arctic? For now, the stones remain silent. Today, the Bolshoi Zayatsky labyrinths stand among the most unusual archaeological sites in northern Europe. Researchers continue studying the islands, searching for clues that might explain their origins, yet many mysteries remain. On a remote Arctic island lies a collection of winding stone pathways, monuments shaped by forgotten hands, structures whose purpose vanished long ago. And one of the strangest archaeological mysteries hidden along the northern edge of the world, the underground complex, hidden beneath a monastery. High in the rugged mountains of southern Georgia, carved into the face of a towering cliff, lies one of the most remarkable hidden complexes in the ancient world. From a distance, the landscape appears almost untouched. Steep rock walls rise above a winding river valley. The surrounding hills are dry and windswept. Few signs suggest that thousands of people once lived within these cliffs. Yet hidden behind the rock face is an enormous network of tunnels, chambers, stairways, and living spaces carved directly into the mountain itself. For centuries, travellers struggled to believe what they were seeing. A city hidden inside stone, a monastery protected by the landscape, and a monument unlike anything else in the Caucasus. This extraordinary place is known as Vardzia, and its story is one of the most fascinating chapters in medieval history. The cave city is located in southern Georgia near the border with Turkey. Today, visitors approaching the site are greeted by hundreds of openings visible across the cliff face. Windows, doorways, and chambers appear stacked above one another across multiple levels. At first glance, it almost seems impossible. The mountain looks less like a natural formation and more like a giant building constructed by nature itself. But every chamber was carved by human hands. The origins of Vardzia date back to the 12th century, during one of the most powerful periods in Georgian history. At the time, the Kingdom of Georgia was expanding its influence across the region. Trade flourished, cities grew, and rulers sought new ways to strengthen and protect their territories. Among them was Queen Tamar, one of the most celebrated figures in Georgian history. Under her reign, Vardzia became one of the kingdom's most ambitious projects. The location was carefully chosen, the cliffs provided natural protection, the surrounding valley offered access to water and important travel routes. Most importantly, the mountain itself could be transformed into a fortress. Rather than building walls across the landscape, the builders carved their defences directly into the rock. Over time, an entire underground complex emerged. The scale of the project was astonishing. Hundreds of chambers were cut into the cliff. Living quarters housed residents. Storage rooms held food and supplies. Tunnels connected different sections of the complex. Stairways allowed movement between levels. There were workshops, meeting areas, and religious spaces. At its height, thousands of people may have lived and worked here. What makes Vardzia especially remarkable is how well organised it appears. This was not a collection of random caves. It was a carefully planned community. Every corridor served a purpose. Every chamber contributed to daily life. The complex functioned almost like a hidden city concealed within the mountain. At the heart of Vardzia stands one of its most important structures, a church carved directly into the rock. Known as the Church of the Dormition, it contains remarkable medieval frescoes that survived for centuries. Paintings cover the interior walls. Religious figures gaze out from the stone surfaces. Among them are portraits of Queen Tamar and members of Georgia's royal family. These artworks provide a rare glimpse into a world that existed hundreds of years ago. The church also reveals another important role of Vardzia. It was not simply a fortress, it was also a religious centre. Monks lived and worshipped here. Pilgrims visited the complex. Spiritual life became woven into the daily routine of the community. The monastery and the city grew together. For many years, Vardzia successfully fulfilled its purpose. Its location offered protection during times of conflict. Invaders would have found it difficult to attack a settlement hidden inside a cliff face. The surrounding mountains created additional barriers. From a defensive perspective, it was an ingenious design. Yet even the most impressive structures cannot escape the forces of nature. In the 13th century, a powerful earthquake struck the region. The disaster caused part of the cliff face to collapse. Large sections of rock broke away. Suddenly, chambers that had once been hidden inside the mountain became exposed to the outside world. Ironically, the same event that damaged Vardzia also revealed much of what modern visitors see today. Without the earthquake, many portions of the city might still remain concealed within the cliff. Although Vardzia survived the earthquake, its fortunes gradually changed. New invasions swept across the region. Political conditions shifted. The importance of the complex declined over time. Many residents eventually left. The once bustling city became quieter. Its tunnels fell silent. Its chambers stood empty. Yet the site was never completely forgotten. Monastic life continued in various forms, and the memory of Vardzia survived through the centuries. Today, archaeologists and historians continue studying the complex. Each chamber provides clues about daily life in medieval Georgia. Every tunnel reveals new details about the ingenuity of its builders. The site remains one of the most important historical monuments in the country, and it continues to amaze visitors from around the world. Hidden within a mountain cliff stands a city carved from stone, a fortress, monastery and community combined into a single extraordinary complex, a place shaped by faith, survival and engineering, and one of the most remarkable underground worlds ever created by human hands. The ancient temple complex found in a farmer's field. For generations, farmers worked the fields of central Germany without realizing what lay hidden beneath the soil. The landscape appeared ordinary. Wide-open farmland stretched across the countryside. Season after season, crops grew where ancient people had once gathered thousands of years earlier. Nothing visible suggested that one of Europe's most remarkable prehistoric monuments was buried below. Then archaeologists began investigating unusual markings in the fields. What they uncovered surprised everyone. Beneath the farmland lay the remains of a vast circular complex built more than 4,000 years ago, a place connected to ceremonies, astronomy, and ancient beliefs. a monument so unusual that it has often been compared to Stonehenge. Today, this remarkable site is known as the Pömmelter Ring Sanctuary, and its discoveries are helping reveal the lives of people who lived in Europe long before written history began. The sanctuary is located near the village of Pömmelter in eastern Germany. For centuries, its remains remained hidden underground. Wooden structures that once stood here had long since disappeared. Unlike stone monuments, timber leaves few visible traces after thousands of years. As a result, the site gradually vanished from view. Only subtle changes in the soil preserved evidence of its existence. Modern aerial photography helped bring the mystery to light. Researchers noticed circular patterns visible from above. These shapes suggested that something important once occupied the area. Excavations soon confirmed their suspicions. Archaeologists uncovered a massive circular enclosure made up of concentric rings, ditches, palisades, and carefully designed entrances. The scale of the site was impressive. The entire complex stretched across a large area of land. Multiple rings surrounded a central space. Wooden posts once stood in carefully arranged patterns, entrances aligned with specific directions. Nothing about the layout appeared random. Every feature seemed planned with great care. Researchers quickly realized they were looking at a ceremonial center rather than an ordinary settlement. The sanctuary dates to roughly 2300 BC. That places it during a fascinating period of European prehistory. Communities across the continent were building monuments, developing trade networks, and creating increasingly complex societies. The people who built Pömmelter left behind no written records, yet the monument itself provides clues about their beliefs and traditions. One of the most intriguing aspects of the sanctuary is its possible connection to the sky. Some entrances appear aligned with the sunrise and sunset during important times of the year. This has led researchers to believe the site may have played a role in tracking seasonal changes. For ancient farming communities, understanding the passage of the seasons was essential. Planting, harvesting, and religious ceremonies often depended on the yearly cycle of the sun. Like several other prehistoric monuments across Europe, Pömmelter may have served as both a ceremonial and astronomical centre. Excavations uncovered evidence that the site was used for gatherings and rituals. Animal remains were discovered in certain areas. Fragments of pottery appeared throughout the complex. Researchers also found signs suggesting that ceremonies may have taken place within the enclosure over many generations. The monument was clearly important to the people who built it. Yet exactly what occurred there remains uncertain. Some discoveries raised even more questions. Archaeologists uncovered human remains within parts of the site. In some cases, the burials appeared unusual. Researchers believe ritual activities may have taken place here, though the exact nature of those practices remains a subject of debate. Without written records, many details have been lost. Only fragments of evidence remain. The sanctuary continues to guard many of its secrets. One reason Pömmelter attracts so much attention is its similarity to other famous prehistoric sites. Researchers have compared it to Stonehenge and other ceremonial monuments found across Europe. These comparisons suggest that ancient communities may have shared certain ideas, traditions, or religious practices across surprisingly large distances. Although separated by geography, many societies were building ceremonial centres during this period. Pömmelter appears to have been part of that broader world. The site also challenges a common misconception about prehistoric people. It is easy to imagine ancient communities as small groups focused entirely on survival, but monuments like Pömmelter reveal something different. Building such a complex required planning, organisation, cooperation, and a shared sense of purpose. Large numbers of people worked together to create something that would outlast generations. That achievement speaks to a level of social complexity often overlooked in discussions of the ancient past. Eventually, the sanctuary was abandoned. The reasons remain unclear. Changing beliefs may have played a role. New communities may have emerged in the region. Over time, the wooden structures decayed, the rings disappeared beneath the soil, and the monument slowly faded from memory. For thousands of years, the sanctuary remained hidden beneath farmland. Only modern archaeology brought its story back into the light. Today, the Pömmelter Ring Sanctuary stands as one of Germany's most important prehistoric discoveries. Researchers continue studying the site and uncovering new details about its builders. Each excavation reveals another piece of a story that remained buried for millennia. Beneath an ordinary farmer's field lay the remains of an ancient ceremonial complex. a monument built by forgotten communities, a place connected to ritual, astronomy, and the changing seasons, and one of the most fascinating prehistoric discoveries ever uncovered in Europe, the ancient settlement found beneath a peat bog. In the flat wetlands of eastern England, archaeologists uncovered a discovery so extraordinary that it felt almost impossible. Most ancient settlements leave behind only fragments: a broken pot, a stone tool, the outline of a long-forgotten building. Time usually destroys the details of everyday life. Wood rots away, textiles disappear, food decays, and entire communities fade into the archaeological record. But this site was different. Here the past seemed frozen in time. Homes still stood where they had collapsed. Tools remained where people left them. Even personal belongings survived. For archaeologists, it was like stepping directly into the Bronze Age. Today, this remarkable site is known as Must Farm, and it has become one of the most important prehistoric discoveries ever made in Britain. The settlement is located in Cambridgeshire, England, within a landscape of rivers, wetlands, and peat bogs. Thousands of years ago, the area looked very different from the farmland that exists today. Waterways wound through the landscape, marshes stretched across the horizon, and small communities built homes above the water on wooden platforms. For the people who lived here, the wetlands provided food, transportation, and protection. It was an ideal place to settle. Archaeologists first became interested in the area decades ago after ancient wooden remains were discovered beneath the peat. But it was only during later excavations that the true significance of the site became clear. Beneath layers of mud and waterlogged soil lay the remains of an entire Bronze Age settlement. And unlike most prehistoric sites, it was astonishingly well preserved. Researchers soon realised they were looking at a rare archaeological treasure. The settlement consisted of several round houses built on wooden stilts above a river channel. Families lived inside these circular structures, much as people elsewhere lived in villages built on dry land. The homes contained hearths for cooking, storage areas for food, and tools used in daily life. For a brief period, the settlement appears to have thrived. Then disaster struck. Evidence suggests a fire swept through the community. The wooden structures burned rapidly. As the supports collapsed, the houses fell into the water below. What was a tragedy for the inhabitants became an incredible stroke of luck for archaeologists thousands of years later. The waterlogged conditions preserved materials that would normally disappear. Wood survived, textiles survived, baskets survived, even food remains survived. The peat and mud created an environment that protected countless objects from decay. As excavation continued, researchers uncovered an astonishing collection of artifacts: bronze tools, wooden utensils, pottery vessels, fishing equipment, pieces of woven fabric. Many items appeared almost untouched despite being more than 3,000 years old. Some pots still contained traces of meals prepared by the settlement's inhabitants. It was as though daily life had been frozen in a single moment. One of the most fascinating aspects of Must Farm is how much it reveals about ordinary people. Many famous archaeological sites focus on kings, monuments, or great cities. Must Farm tells a different story. It shows how everyday families lived, what they ate, how they built their homes, and how they organised their communities. The discoveries provide an unusually detailed glimpse into Bronze Age life. Researchers found evidence that the people living here were skilled craftspeople. They worked with wood, metal, and textiles. They maintained connections with other communities. Some objects discovered at the site originated from surprisingly distant locations. Trade and exchange networks linked people across large areas of prehistoric Britain and beyond. The settlement was not isolated. It formed part of a wider world. Yet despite all that archaeologists have learned, some mysteries remain. What exactly caused the fire? Was it an accident, a conflict, or something else entirely? The evidence points to a sudden and catastrophic event, but the full story may never be known. The people who lived here left behind no written records. Only the objects preserved beneath the peat bog tell their story. Another mystery concerns the settlement's brief existence. Researchers believe the village may have been occupied for only a relatively short period before its destruction. If true, it means an enormous amount of effort went into building a community that survived for only a generation or two. Why people chose this location, and how long they expected to remain there, are questions that continue to interest archaeologists. What makes Must Farm so remarkable is not simply its age. it is the level of detail preserved within the site. Few archaeological discoveries allow researchers to see prehistoric life so clearly. Instead of isolated artifacts, archaeologists uncovered entire households. Instead of fragments, they found complete stories waiting beneath the mud. Today, Must Farm is often described as Britain's Bronze Age Pompeii. The comparison is understandable. Both sites preserve moments of daily life interrupted by sudden disaster. Both provide extraordinary windows into the past, and both remind us how fragile human communities can be. Hidden beneath an English peat bog lay the remains of a forgotten settlement, a village preserved by water and time, a community frozen at the moment of its destruction, and one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries ever made in the prehistoric world: the mysterious tombs carved into a cliff face. Along the eastern bank of the Nile in central Egypt, towering limestone cliffs rise above the surrounding landscape. For thousands of years, travellers moving along the river would have seen these cliffs standing over the fertile valley below. At first glance, they appear like countless other rock formations scattered across Egypt. But hidden within the stone are dozens of ancient tombs, doorways cut directly into the cliff face, burial chambers carved deep into the rock, and traces of people whose names have largely faded from history. Unlike the famous tombs of the Valley of the Kings, these monuments attract relatively few visitors today. Yet they preserve the story of an ancient community that once flourished along the Nile. This remarkable place is known as Khao el-Kebir, and its cliffside tombs remain one of Egypt's lesser-known archaeological treasures. Khao el-Kebir is located in Upper Egypt, roughly midway between Cairo and Luxor. For thousands of years, the Nile served as the lifeline of the region. Settlements developed along its banks, fields provided food, trade moved along the river, and local leaders governed communities scattered throughout the valley. The people buried at Khao el-Kebir were part of that world, a world that existed long before many of Egypt's most famous monuments were built. The cliffs overlooking the settlement offered an ideal location for burials. Ancient Egyptians often placed tombs on the edge of the desert beyond areas of daily life. The living occupied the fertile lands near the river. The dead rested in the rocky hills beyond. At Khao el-Kebir, generations followed this tradition. Over time, an entire necropolis emerged within the limestone cliffs. Workers carved chambers directly into the rock. Passageways led into burial rooms. Some tombs were simple, others were surprisingly elaborate. The site became the final resting place for local officials, administrators, and members of wealthy families. Although they never achieved the fame of pharaohs, these individuals played important roles within ancient Egyptian society. One of the most fascinating aspects of the tombs is the artwork preserved inside them. Ancient painters covered walls with colourful scenes from daily life. Boats travel along the Nile, farmers work in fields, craftsmen create goods, families gather for meals and ceremonies. These images provide valuable glimpses into the lives of ordinary Egyptians rather than the grand achievements of kings. For archaeologists, such scenes are often just as important as royal monuments. They reveal how people lived, worked, and viewed the world around them. The tombs also contain inscriptions carved into stone, some record names and titles. Others include prayers intended to assist the deceased in the afterlife. Ancient Egyptians believed death was not an end but a transition into another existence. Preparing a proper tomb was therefore an essential part of ensuring a successful journey beyond this life. Every decoration served a purpose, every inscription carried meaning, every chamber reflected beliefs that shaped Egyptian civilization for thousands of years. Despite their importance, the tombs of Khao el-Kebir remained relatively unknown compared to Egypt's more famous archaeological sites. The attention of early explorers often focused on royal monuments, pyramids, and spectacular temples. Many regional burial sites received far less attention. As a result, Khao el-Kebir remained one of the quieter corners of Egyptian archaeology. Yet that relative obscurity may have helped preserve parts of the site. Researchers who studied the tombs discovered evidence spanning multiple periods of Egyptian history. Different generations continued using the necropolis over long stretches of time. As rulers changed and dynasties rose and fell, the cliffs remained a place of burial. The tombs became a record of continuity in a world that often experienced political change. Like many ancient sites, however, Khao el-Kebir still contains mysteries. Some tombs suffered damage over the centuries, others remain only partially studied. Archaeologists continue examining inscriptions, artwork and architectural features in hopes of learning more about the people buried there. Every new discovery adds another piece to a story that remains incomplete. One question concerns how much of the ancient necropolis still lies hidden. The visible tombs may represent only part of the original complex. Additional chambers could remain concealed within the cliffs, waiting to be discovered. Such possibilities continue to attract archaeological interest. The landscape itself contributes to the site's atmosphere. Standing before the cliffs today, it is easy to understand why ancient Egyptians selected this location. The limestone walls rise dramatically above the valley. The Nile flows nearby as it has for millennia, and the tomb entrances remain visible against the rock face, silent reminders of lives lived long ago. Unlike bustling cities, places like Khao el-Kebir encourage reflection. They connect visitors not with rulers and empires, but with generations of people whose stories survive only through stone and paint. Today, the tombs remain an important source of information about regional life in ancient Egypt. They reveal how communities beyond the royal courts viewed death, memory, and the afterlife. And they remind us that history is often preserved in unexpected places. Hidden within the cliffs above the Nile lies a forgotten necropolis, a collection of tombs carved directly into stone, a record of lives lived thousands of years ago, and one of the most intriguing archaeological landscapes in ancient Egypt, the strange circular ruins in the Sahara. Deep within the Western Sahara, in a landscape of rocky plateaus and endless horizons, lie the remains of one of Africa's most remarkable forgotten civilizations. Today, the region appears harsh and unforgiving. Dry winds sweep across the land, rain is scarce, vegetation is limited. At first glance, it seems like an unlikely place for large communities to have flourished. Yet thousands of years ago, this landscape looked very different. People built settlements here, they raised animals, they traded with distant communities, and they constructed hundreds of stone structures that can still be seen today. Among the most intriguing are a series of strange circular ruins scattered across the plateau. These ancient remains belong to a place known as Dar Tichit, and they preserve the story of one of the earliest known urban societies in West Africa. Dar Tichit is located in modern-day Mauritania. The site occupies a series of sandstone cliffs and plateaus overlooking vast stretches of desert. Today, the area feels isolated, but in prehistoric times, the climate was far more favourable. Grasslands covered parts of the landscape. Water sources were more abundant. Communities could survive in places that are now largely deserted. It was during this period that people began building permanent settlements across the region. Archaeologists believe these settlements first emerged thousands of years ago. Over time, they grew into surprisingly organised communities. Stone walls divided living areas, structures were carefully arranged across the landscape, and distinctive circular buildings appeared throughout many of the settlements. From above, some of these ruins form patterns unlike anything most people expect to find in the Sahara. The circular structures have attracted considerable archaeological attention. Built from locally available stone, they served as homes, storage areas, and other community spaces. Generations of people added to the settlements over time. What began as small communities gradually developed into larger and more complex centres. The scale of construction reveals a society capable of long-term planning and cooperation. For many years, historians focus primarily on ancient civilizations along the Nile or Mediterranean coast. Dar Tichit helped challenge that perspective. The site demonstrated that sophisticated societies were also developing deep within West Africa, long before many later kingdoms emerged. This realization transformed how researchers viewed the history of the region. The people who lived here were not isolated. Evidence suggests they maintained trade connections with neighbouring communities. Goods, ideas and technologies moved across large distances. Even in a landscape that now appears remote, networks linked different populations together. The settlements formed part of a broader world. One of the most important discoveries at Dar Tichit involves agriculture. Researchers found evidence that inhabitants cultivated crops and managed livestock. This combination allowed communities to establish more permanent settlements. Rather than constantly moving from place to place, people could remain in one area for extended periods. That stability encouraged population growth and increasingly complex social organisation. The circular ruins visible today are the remains of that process. Stone by stone, generation by generation, communities transformed the landscape. Yet many mysteries remain. Unlike civilizations that left written records, the builders of Dar-Tichit preserved their history mainly through architecture and material culture. No ancient texts explain how their society was governed. No written accounts describe their beliefs. Archaeologists must reconstruct the story using artifacts, settlement patterns, and the ruins themselves. As a result, many questions remain unanswered. Researchers continue debating exactly how these communities were organized. Some evidence suggests social hierarchies existed within the settlements. Certain structures appear larger and more prominent than others. Different sections of the settlements may have served different purposes, but the details remain uncertain. The ruins provide clues. They do not provide complete answers. Another mystery concerns the eventual decline of the settlements. At some point, environmental conditions began changing. The region gradually became drier. Water became less reliable. Life in the area grew increasingly difficult. As the Sahara expanded, many communities were forced to adapt or relocate. Over time, the settlements were abandoned. Their stone walls remained behind as silent witnesses to a vanished world. For centuries, the ruins stood largely unnoticed beyond the attention of the local communities. The desert preserved them. Wind swept across the plateau. Generations came and went. Yet the stone foundations endured. Only in modern times did archaeologists begin uncovering the full significance of the site. Today, Dar-Tichit is recognized as one of the most important archaeological landscapes in Africa. Its settlements reveal a chapter of history that was once poorly understood. They demonstrate that complex societies emerged in many different parts of the world, often in places modern observers least expect. The strange circular ruins scattered across the plateau are more than ancient buildings. They are evidence of human ingenuity, adaptation, and community. Hidden within the Sahara lies the remains of a forgotten civilization. A network of stone settlements built in a greener age, a society shaped by trade, agriculture, and cooperation. And one of the most fascinating archaeological mysteries in the history of West Africa, the hidden temple beneath layers of history. In the deserts of southern Iraq, far from the crowds that visit the ancient wonders of Egypt or Greece, lie the remains of a city that many people have never heard of. At first glance, the site appears little more than a series of dusty mounds rising above the surrounding plain. There are no towering monuments visible from miles away, no massive walls dominating the horizon, no grand structures immediately revealing the importance of the place. Yet beneath those layers of earth lies one of the most significant archaeological sites ever discovered, a place that may represent the very beginning of urban civilization itself. This ancient settlement is known as Eridu, and hidden within its ruins is a temple complex that tells the story of one of humanity's earliest cities. Eridu is located near the ancient marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, a region often called the cradle of civilization. Thousands of years ago, this landscape looked very different. Rivers flowed through fertile plains, wetlands supported abundant wildlife, and early communities began experimenting with new ways of living. People settled in permanent villages, agriculture expanded, and some settlements gradually grew larger and more organized. Among them was Eridu. According to ancient Mesopotamian tradition, Eridu was one of the world's first cities. Later civilizations remembered it as a place of enormous importance. Some ancient texts even described it as the first city established after the creation of humanity. Whether those stories were literally true is impossible to know, but there is no doubt that Eridu was incredibly old. Archaeological evidence suggests people were living here thousands of years before the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. The most remarkable discovery at Eridu lies at the centre of the settlement. Beneath layers of mud, brick, sand, and centuries of rebuilding, archaeologists uncovered a sequence of temples stacked one above another. Generation after generation, people returned to the same sacred location. When an older temple deteriorated, a new one was built on top of it, then another, and another. Over time, these repeated cycles created an artificial mound containing the history of centuries of religious activity. The deeper archaeologists dug, the farther back in time they travelled. Each layer revealed an earlier version of the temple. Some were relatively simple. Others showed increasing complexity and sophistication. Together they provided a rare record of how religious architecture evolved over thousands of years. It was almost like reading the history of a civilization one layer at a time. The temples were dedicated to Enki, one of the most important deities in Mesopotamian religion. Enki was associated with water, wisdom, and creation. For people living in southern Mesopotamia, water was essential to survival. The rivers and marshes supported agriculture and made settlement possible. It is not surprising that a deity connected to water held such an important place in local beliefs. The temple complex became the spiritual heart of the city. What makes Eridu especially fascinating is how often the site was rebuilt. Many ancient communities abandoned old structures and moved elsewhere. The people of Eridu chose a different approach. They preserved continuity. Generation after generation worshipped in the same location. Even as architecture changed, the sacred significance of the site remained. The temple was not simply a building, it was a connection between the past and the present. Excavations revealed much more than temples. Researchers uncovered houses, tools, pottery, and evidence of daily life. Together, these discoveries paint a picture of a growing community, adapting to new challenges and opportunities. The inhabitants were among the earliest people to live in organised urban environments. They helped establish traditions that would later influence some of history's greatest civilizations. In many ways, Eridu represents the beginning of a much larger story. Yet despite decades of research, important questions remain unanswered. Why did Eridu become so important in the first place? Why was this specific location chosen for one of humanity's earliest urban centres? And how much of the city still remains hidden beneath the ground? Archaeologists continue searching for answers. Each excavation reveals new information, but many mysteries remain buried beneath layers of history. The eventual decline of Eridu is another puzzle. At some point, the city's importance faded. Other settlements grew larger and more influential. Trade routes shifted. Political power moved elsewhere. Gradually, the once important city was abandoned. Wind and sand covered the ruins. The temples disappeared beneath the landscape. For thousands of years, the city survived only in ancient stories and forgotten memories. Then modern archaeology brought Eridu back into the light. The discoveries transformed our understanding of early civilization. Researchers realized they were looking at one of the oldest urban centers ever identified. A place where some of humanity's earliest experiments with city life unfolded. A place where religion, community, and innovation came together at the dawn of history. Today, the ruins of Eridu remain quiet. The temples that once attracted worshippers have long since vanished from view, yet beneath the mounds their foundations still survive, layer upon layer, century upon century, preserved beneath the soil of Mesopotamia. Hidden beneath the deserts of Iraq lies a temple complex built by some of the world's earliest city dwellers, a sacred place rebuilt across generations, a monument buried beneath layers of history, and one of the most important archaeological discoveries ever made in the ancient world. The stone structures scattered across the high desert. High in the Andes of Bolivia, where vast plains stretch beneath snow-capped mountains, lie the remains of one of South America's greatest ancient mysteries. The landscape feels immense. Cold winds sweep across the high desert. The air is thin. The horizon seems endless. Scattered across this rugged terrain are stone structures that have puzzled researchers for generations. Some stand alone. Others appear as fragments of larger complexes long since lost to time. Many are connected to one of the most important ancient cities ever built in the Americas, a place known as Tiwanaku. But beyond the famous monuments at the centre of the city, archaeologists have uncovered something equally fascinating. A network of ruins spread across the surrounding landscape, silent reminders of a civilization that once dominated much of the Andean world. These are the peripheral ruins of Tiwanaku, and they help tell the story of a society whose influence extended far beyond a single city. The ancient city of Tiwanaku lies near the southern shores of Lake Titicaca. For centuries, travellers have been amazed by its massive stone architecture. Monumental gateways, carefully carved blocks, and ceremonial spaces built with extraordinary precision. The city flourished long before the rise of the Inca Empire. At its height, it was one of the most important centres in South America. Yet the story of Tiwanaku extends far beyond its famous ceremonial core. As archaeologists explored the surrounding region, they discovered evidence of settlements, temples, agricultural sites, and stone structures scattered across the high plateau. These ruins revealed that Tiwanaku was not an isolated city. It was the centre of a much larger world. Communities existed throughout the surrounding landscape. Roads linked distant locations. People moved between settlements carrying goods, ideas, and traditions. The civilization's influence reached far beyond the city itself. Many of the peripheral ruins appear surprisingly modest compared to the great monuments of Tiwanaku. Some consist of stone foundations, others contain partially preserved walls or ceremonial platforms. At first glance, they may seem less impressive than the city's famous temples, yet these sites are incredibly important. They reveal how ordinary people lived within the broader Tiwanaku sphere. While the central city served ceremonial and political functions, surrounding communities supported the civilization through farming, trade, and daily life. The high-altitude environment presented unique challenges. Temperatures could change dramatically between day and night. Frost threatened crops. Water management required careful planning. Yet the people of Tiwanaku developed innovative agricultural systems that allowed large populations to thrive in conditions many would consider difficult. Evidence of raised fields and irrigation networks can still be found across parts of the region. These systems helped transform the landscape and supported communities for centuries. One of the most fascinating aspects of the peripheral ruins is how they reveal the scale of Tiwanaku's influence. Artifacts discovered at distant sites often share similarities with those found in the city's ceremonial centre. Architectural styles repeat across large areas. Religious symbols appear far from the main city. Together, these clues suggest that Tiwanaku's cultural reach extended across vast portions of the Andes. Researchers continue debating exactly how this influence was maintained. Some believe political authority connected distant communities. Others emphasize trade, religion, and cultural exchange. The reality may have involved a combination of all three. Like many ancient civilizations, Tiwanaku left behind no written records explaining how its society functioned. Archaeologists must reconstruct the story from stone, pottery, and the landscape itself. Every newly studied ruin adds another piece to the puzzle. Yet many mysteries remain. Why were certain peripheral sites established in specific locations? What roles did they serve within the wider civilization? How closely were they connected to the central city? And what caused the eventual decline of this remarkable society? The answers are not always clear. At some point, environmental changes, political shifts, or social pressures began affecting the region. The great city gradually lost its influence. Communities changed, populations moved, and many settlements were eventually abandoned. Over time, the high desert reclaimed much of what remained. Stone walls collapsed. Structures eroded. The civilization faded into history, yet the ruins endured. For centuries they stood beneath the Andean sky, waiting to be studied once again. Today, archaeologists continue surveying the region surrounding Tiwanaku. New discoveries regularly expand our understanding of the civilization. What once seemed like isolated ruins now appear as parts of a vast interconnected landscape, a network of communities that work together to sustain one of the ancient world's most impressive societies. The scattered stone structures reveal a story far larger than a single city. They show how people adapted to challenging environments, how cultures spread across great distances, and how civilizations leave traces far beyond their most famous monuments. Across the high deserts of the Andes stand the forgotten remains of a lost world. Stone structures scattered across the landscape, settlements linked to one of South America's greatest civilizations, and a network of ruins that continues to reveal new secrets about the ancient past. The forgotten fortress lost above the clouds. High in the Andes of southern Peru, where mountain valleys cut through the landscape and clouds drift across distant peaks, stands the remains of a remarkable ancient complex. For centuries, travellers crossing these highlands would have encountered impressive stone walls rising from the earth, massive foundations, long ceremonial structures, and the remains of a settlement that once played an important role in one of South America's greatest civilizations. Today, the site is known as Rakchi. Yet despite its impressive scale, it remains far less famous than many of Peru's better-known archaeological treasures. Few visitors make the journey. Fewer still realize how important this place once was. Hidden among the mountains is a forgotten stronghold that helped connect distant regions of the Inca world, a place where religion, trade, and administration came together high above the valleys below. The site lies along an important route that once linked different parts of the Inca Empire. The surrounding landscape is dramatic. Rolling hills rise toward the horizon, Mountain winds sweep across open plains, and the altitude gives the entire region a sense of isolation. Yet centuries ago, this was not a remote location. It was a place filled with movement. Travellers passed through regularly. Merchants carried goods between distant settlements. Messengers moved along imperial roads, and local communities gathered around one of the most important centres in the region. At the heart of Rachi stands its most famous structure, a massive building unlike almost anything else in Inca architecture. The remains of a huge central wall still dominate the site today. Even in ruins, its scale is impressive. Stone foundations support sections of carefully constructed masonry. Rows of columns once supported an enormous roof. For archaeologists, the structure immediately raised questions. Why build something so large in this location, and what purpose did it serve? Most researchers believe the complex was dedicated to Viracocha, one of the most important deities in Inca religion. According to tradition, Viracocha was associated with creation and held a special place within Andean beliefs. The temple at Rachi may have attracted pilgrims from across the empire. People travelling through the mountains could have stopped here to participate in ceremonies and religious gatherings. The site was more than simply a place of worship. Excavations revealed evidence of extensive storage facilities surrounding the central complex. Rows of circular buildings once stood across the landscape. These structures were likely used to store food, supplies, and other goods. Their presence suggests that Rachi also served an important administrative function. The Inca Empire depended upon carefully managed networks of resources. Locations like Rachi helped support that system. Food could be stored here. Supplies could be distributed. Travellers could find support along important routes. The settlement became part of a much larger network that stretched across the Andes. One of the most fascinating aspects of Rachi is its strategic location. The site occupies a position between different ecological zones. Goods from highland communities could pass through the area. Resources from lower elevations could move in the opposite direction. This made Rachi an important point of connection within the empire. The surrounding roads linked the site to distant regions, allowing people and information to travel across vast distances. Like many important Inca centres, Rachi combined practical and ceremonial functions. Religion and administration existed side by side. Daily life unfolded beneath the shadow of monumental architecture. The complex became a gathering place where local communities interacted with the broader world of the empire. Yet despite its importance, many mysteries remain. Exactly how many people lived here permanently? How often did large religious gatherings take place? And what did the site look like during its peak centuries ago? The ruins provide clues, but they cannot answer every question. The arrival of the Spanish in the 16th century transformed the Andean world. The Inca Empire collapsed. Administrative networks broke apart. Many important sites were abandoned or repurposed. Rachi gradually lost the role it had once played. The buildings fell silent. Roofs disappeared. Walls slowly deteriorated. Over time, the complex became another forgotten chapter in the history of the Andes. Yet the mountain landscape helped preserve much of what remained. Stone foundations survived. Sections of monumental architecture endured. And the outlines of the ancient settlement remained visible long after its builders were gone. Centuries later, archaeologists began uncovering its story once again. Their work revealed that Rachi was far more than an isolated ruin. It was a vital centre within one of the largest civilizations ever to emerge in the Americas. Today, visitors walking among the ruins can still sense the scale of the site. The great temple wall rises above the surrounding landscape. The remains of storehouses stretch across the plain, and the mountains stand watch much as they did hundreds of years ago. The complex feels suspended between earth and sky, a place shaped by faith, organization, and human ambition. High above the valleys of Peru stands a forgotten stronghold of the Inca world, a ceremonial centre hidden among the mountains, a place where travellers, pilgrims, and officials once gathered. And one of the most fascinating ancient complexes lost among the clouds, the lost colony hidden inside the Florida wilderness. Along the northeastern coast of Florida, where ancient forests meet winding rivers and salt marshes stretch toward the sea, lies the site of a settlement that witnessed the earliest chapters of European history in what would become the United States. A place of wooden fortifications, religious missions, explorers and settlers, and encounters between completely different worlds. For centuries, its story faded beneath layers of soil, vegetation, and time. The buildings disappeared, the original colony vanished, and much of what happened here became buried within the Florida wilderness. Yet beneath the ground, traces of that forgotten world survived. Today, archaeologists continue uncovering the story of one of the oldest colonial settlements in North America. This remarkable place is known as Mission Nombre de Dios, and it remains one of the most fascinating historical sites in the American Southeast. The story begins during the 16th century, an age of exploration when European powers were expanding across oceans in search of new territories, trade routes, and opportunities. At the time, Florida was a vast and largely unfamiliar land to European explorers. Dense forests covered much of the landscape. Rivers cut through wetlands and coastal plains, and indigenous communities had already lived here for thousands of years. Long before Europeans arrived, the region was home to thriving societies with their own traditions, trade networks, and histories. Everything changed when Spanish expeditions reached the Florida coast. The Spanish crown viewed the region as strategically important. Control of Florida offered access to vital maritime routes used by ships travelling between Europe and the Americas. Protecting those routes became a priority. As a result, settlements began appearing along the coastline. One of the most important was established near what is now St. Augustine. Mission Nombre de Dios emerged as part of this growing colonial presence. The settlement became both a religious centre and an important point of contact between Spanish colonists and indigenous communities. Priests, settlers, soldiers, and local populations all played roles in shaping its history. The mission served multiple purposes. It was a place of worship, a centre for education and cultural exchange, and an outpost helping support Spain's presence in the region. One of the most fascinating aspects of the site is its age. The mission is connected to some of the earliest permanent European activities in what would later become the United States. Generations lived, worked, and worshipped here, while much of North America remained largely unexplored by Europeans. The surrounding wilderness presented constant challenges. Hurricanes threatened coastal settlements. Diseases spread through populations unfamiliar with one another's illnesses. Food supplies could become uncertain, and tensions sometimes emerged between competing groups. Life on the colonial frontier required resilience and adaptation. Yet despite these difficulties, the settlement endured. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence revealing how people lived during this period. Artifacts recovered from the site include ceramics, tools, religious objects, and everyday household items. Each discovery provides another glimpse into daily life centuries ago. Rather than focusing solely on famous leaders or major events, these objects tell the stories of ordinary people, families, workers, missionaries, and indigenous individuals whose lives intersected at this remarkable place. The site also reflects a much larger historical story. Florida became a crossroads where cultures, languages, and traditions met, sometimes peacefully, sometimes through conflict. Mission Nombre de Dios stood at the centre of these encounters for generations. One reason the site remains so important today is because much of its history remained hidden underground. Buildings made from wood disappeared long ago, walls collapsed, vegetation reclaimed abandoned areas, but beneath the surface archaeological evidence survived. Careful excavations have gradually revealed details that written records alone could never provide. Researchers continue uncovering new information about how the settlement evolved over time. The discoveries help historians better understand one of the earliest colonial communities in North America. Yet many questions remain unanswered. How did daily interactions unfold between different groups? What did the original settlement truly look like? And how many stories remain buried beneath the soil waiting to be discovered? The Florida wilderness still guards many of its secrets. Today, Mission Nombre de Dios stands as one of the most significant historical and archaeological sites in the United States, not because of treasure, not because of grand monuments, but because it preserves the memory of a community that helped shape the earliest history of European settlement in North America. Hidden within the forests of Florida lies a lost colony, a place of exploration, faith, and cultural encounters, a settlement that witnessed the birth of a new era, and one of the most fascinating forgotten chapters in American history.